So our channel is Culture Shock. Me and my cousin pretty much just started it. We're interviewing, interesting people with interesting topics and stuff like that. You're actually going to be the first interview, so good job with that. Pretty much go ahead and tell me about yourself a little bit. You know, whatever.
Sure. My name is Caleb. I'm a student at Western Washington University in obviously Washington State. I was raised in Montana, born in Washington actually, so I've done a little bit of flip-flopping. I'm a political science major, second year student, and I just declared. Um, and I definitely do have an interest, I guess, in what makes government tick and stuff like that, which I think a lot of times goes hand in hand, with being interested in conspiracy, things like that. Um, so I think that's really, what led me here in the first place was just sort of an interest in, I suppose, the inner workings of government, what makes it tick, and why it exists in the first place.
Okay, cool, cool. So yeah, go ahead and just tell me about your topic, a little bit about Charles Tilly. Just kind of explain it. I did a little bit of research prior to this, but I know for someone coming from you that knows it probably religiously, go ahead and just, spill it and explain it to like somebody if they're 5 years old, you know?
Sure, sure. Basically, Charles Tilly um, is the guy. He's sort of the accepted name in the political science field right now. He is the I guess father of a theory that war is necessary in order for a state to exist, and that war and a state or a nation state exist in sort of um, I guess, a symbiotic relationship with each other, and that the cycle will eventually break down because it's not a sustainable relationship. But war or conflict is, I guess, necessary in order to keep control of a target population and extract as much wealth as possible from that population. And we can get into, a little bit more specifically how that's done and why that's done. But that would be his main thesis. So, this isn't even really like fringe political theory or anything like that. This is, mainstream, pretty well accepted, even at the university level, where a lot of people would, kind of like to be more optimistic about it and stuff. This is what you'll hear like in any, even 1 or 200 level class about political science of any sort. Charles Tilly's name will come up quite often. Andrew Weber was, sort of the previous name on the topic, and he did a lot of valuable work as well. But he's sort of taken a little bit of a backseat, I guess, ever since Tilly's theories became popular. Um, yeah, I mean, I suppose that'd be sort of a general overview um, of, I suppose, like the main idea there.
Okay. Pretty much, does it all ultimately come down to wealth, just making money, pretty much, for, would you say, is what he's kind of mostly looking at?
Um, yeah, I suppose if we want to stick with exactly what Tilly is talking about and not branch off too far into, I guess, expanding into what, I think the implications of his theory might be. What he explicitly talks about is the government is not necessarily, involved in a lot of evil or conspiracy or anything like that. The government just does this, I guess, process in order to, I guess, sustain itself because government's job is to ensure that it continues to exist, if that sort of makes sense. Um, so yeah, I suppose wealth extraction from a population would really be the main point of, I guess, maintaining the idea of conflict or threat of conflict. And again, we can sort of talk about how that gets a little bit more interesting conspiracy wise. in a second. But yeah, it would basically just be money. I mean, it's always money. Yeah, so it would be primarily monetary for sure.
Okay, yeah, and man, feel free, to branch off and get crazy. I mean, that's the whole point. Make we can make this interesting. You can explain, really, for people that really don't understand this topic and stuff like that. I guess the ones that you could say are not, quote unquote woke. I guess you could say. Um, what what would you say? Like, what things could you point to prove that this is actually really going on? I guess right now in current day, you know.
That's a fine question. Yeah, there's quite a few examples, even just in recent history, um, where things like this would have been pretty apparent to anybody that was watching closely at all. So even if you look at something like, like the last major war that had a huge loss of life, I guess. I mean, let's go all the way back to the Great War, right? Let's go back to, World War II. So if we go back to World War II, even before Charles Tilly was really theorizing about any of this, you look at the reasons why the United States chose to get involved in that war, and this is a little bit long-winded, and it won't make a ton of sense at first, but just kind of bear with me.
Oh, you're good.
So during World War II, the United States saw that Germany was encroaching further and further towards the UK. And the United States had significant banking interests tied up with the UK, JP Morgan, obviously. And so the United States, saw fit to get involved in the war. Now, to do that, obviously they had to come up with a way to scare people into wanting to get involved. And so, they said, hey, there's all this violence going on in Europe right now, and, this population of people is being, oppressed, and there's a genocide going on now. Those are perfectly legitimate reasons for getting involved in the conflict, obviously. So not to say that there wasn't some justification for getting involved whatsoever. It was, but, if you really do some thinking, why would the United States really care about the humanitarian side of it whatsoever? That sort of thing happens all the time. Now that huge, big wars are sort of out of fashion, excuse me for just a second.
Oh,
Conducting an interview.
Oh,
Sorry about that. Landlord.
um, keep
So
going. Keep going.
So now that huge conflicts like that are sort of out of fashion, the government finds ways to create, I guess, sort of a sense of fear that, I guess, requires that people rely on them for protection. So, you look at, modern day threats are not necessarily, um, pictures on TV of millions of people losing their lives, but, it's like scary, sort of sudden unknown things like terror attacks or cyber terror attacks, things like that. Really anything that they can use in order to destabilize the population or create division amongst us, and I guess cause us to be afraid of something in order to rely on them and trust them with our money and allow them to make decisions with our money. So, follow the money anywhere, and you'll see examples and even really popular conspiracy theories, which again are theories. But if you sort of apply this theory to a lot of thinking around like false flags, like a lot of people say the 9/11, false flag.
I was just about that.
Think about that. Sure. I mean, hey, think about it. We want natural resource from somewhere. specifically the Middle East, and they're thinking, like what can we do to basically make people be okay with us doing this? Oh well, let's create something really scary on television and make the Middle East into this boogeyman that people are completely okay going and fighting. Um, and that works with lots of different things. I mean, pick a conspiracy theory, and you can probably make it about the government trying to terrify its citizens in order to create fear.
Okay. So would you say like every president that we've always had is kind of like implemented into this? Like they're all going for the general same favor, could you say?
It's tough to, I guess, put the blame on every single elected representative at the state or federal level when we're talking about something like this, because a lot of times, I guess, the government is really not the government, if that makes sense. Eventually, every nation state becomes a captured nation state, which just means that there's a group or groups that have so much influence within the borders of the nation state, whether through financial or broadcasting means, anything really, that the elected officials don't really matter so much anymore. I think that you can make a pretty good argument that ever since I don't know, ever since about 100 years ago or so, maybe even slightly more than that, the United States has really fallen away from its representative democratic roots, and people involvement in the government is lower and lower, and elected officials are really just sort of on TV to make everyone feel like their voice matters. I really wouldn't pin this on every single president. To be certain, there's probably certain presidents that were directly involved or solicited to be a part of something. Naming who and exactly when and what they did would be difficult, just because and this word gets tossed around a lot, so it's been sort of diluted. But I was a fan of this concept, before it became like a 2016 talking point, which is the deep state. And the deep state is, not just some kind of cringy buzzword that people throw. Oh yeah, the deep state. The deep state is a real collection of federal agencies, mostly made up of unelected bureaucrats, and they definitely do a fine job of subverting elected offices. And making sure that the agenda of whoever is in charge of the now captured United States gets pushed through. So I'd put it less on elected officials, even presidents, and I guess more on big money that works behind the scenes and is able to easily influence federal offices.
I got you. I got you. So would you say this last election that we had, where we got Donald Trump and everybody was totally against having him and stuff like that, would you say that was pretty much going against the agenda, or do you feel like it was meant to happen that way?
Well, I think that really, when it comes down to it, um, and this is unpopular, and it might not even be right, but if I just had to say what I thought was going on, I think that the two-party system is a simple distraction from real life. When you look at Democrats and Republicans, and even if you throw the Libertarians or the whatever party in there, it's really still just a reality TV show. I mean, you have,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, you have, basically two parties that act like they hate each other on TV every single day, and not only do they almost unanimously pass 3,000 new pieces of legislature every single year, and we never even hear about it because they all want 99% of the same stuff. Then they go on TV and they argue about a few, things that they make look super important, but behind the scenes they're passing monetary policy, foreign policy, how we deal with other countries and how we spend our money, and nobody ever even knows that it goes on because they're too busy arguing about whether or not somebody should bake this cake, or arguing about whether or not this one person did this one thing, yada yada. It's really just a huge dog and pony show, because if the country were not as divided as it were, people wouldn't get out to vote, and the less people that vote in elections of any kind, the less legitimacy elected officials have. So, if we get a situation where everyone agrees on almost everything, which actually is the case for most Americans would agree on almost everything. If people were allowed to realize that, they would realize that the people that they're paying billions of dollars to in tax revenue to keep in office are really not their friends and don't have their best interests at heart, and are basically just trying to get them riled up in order to get them to go vote to legitimize the office that they want to hold. So Democrat, Republican, it's all just sort of a farce, at least in my opinion. And I guess that's pretty nihilistic. But it just makes a lot of sense if you just sort of watch how people act on TV and what actually gets passed. And I think that a reasonable person could come to the same conclusion pretty easily.
So do you think in order to keep this going, pretty much the ideas of Charles Tilly and whatnot, do you feel like there's like almost kind of like a secret agenda, a secret group of people that are making this stay established like this? Like, I guess you could say like the Illuminati or, or Freemasons, whatever you want to say, Would you say that actually is happening?
Ooh, yeah, I mean that's a tough one. I mean, there's it would be pretty hard to argue that the Illuminati and Freemasonry doesn't exist, because they're actual historical societies. I'm not sure if I could do as well as point the finger at anyone in particular, but it does seem to be interesting that the same pattern repeats itself and has repeated itself as long as organized societies have been around. Even if you look at somewhere as ancient as Rome, one of the things that started to break down their culture was that they didn't have, they didn't have anybody left to fight. They had conquered basically an entire continent, and people were just allowed to, have leisure time, and there was a great amount of peace. So from what we know, and there's multiple accounts of what happened, but they started to break down because basically their government ran out of excuses, believable excuses, to take their money to build infrastructure and things like that, and the culture started to devolve, just like it's devolving right now in the United States, and they ended up becoming weak and easy to conquer. When you look at even ancient societies like that and how they were ruined in the same cyclical fashion that we are being ruined right now, it could definitely point to the existence of some kind of, I guess, motivating unseen force. But when we see exactly how ancient a lot of the problems, I guess, are, or how ancient some societies that are affected by the same thing are, I think that it'd be hard to pin it on a secret society just because the places where it's happened and the fashion in how it's happened are I guess just so diverse and so spread out that it would be an impressive feat. If there's somebody out there listening right now and you are responsible for collapsing every single government that's ever existed in the same way, then kudos to you.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I mean, maybe there's some kind of, intelligence that's responsible for the design. If you believe in God, if you believe in some kind of elevated consciousness that exists on a different dimension, take your pick. But it definitely does seem to be influenced by some sort of intelligent design just because it works so well.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I actually, before I had this interview with you, I saw like in your post history where you said it in the somewhere in the Bible, it kind of points to this, and I just wanted to see your kind of view on this, like biblically, what kind of goes on with it, and whatnot. I am a Christian too, so I found it a little fascinating. So go ahead and just kind of explain into that. For all these people, it's almost been predicted, couldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. As a Christian myself, I know that we're supposed to believe on faith alone, but sometimes that's not enough for me. So I was sort of a naughty boy, I guess, and I looked for other reasons to believe. And one of the most convincing arguments that I found for Christianity definitely lies in the accuracy of the prophecies contained in the New Testament, especially. If we look at, Revelations, I guess, is a really cliche, but also a just fine source for some of this stuff. And if you take that and relate it to the book of Daniel, you'll find that it was prophesied that basically the world would descend into deeper and deeper chaos, and certain figures would rise out of the chaos and basically promise stability and salvation. And for a time, that would be the case. But then, after a brief lull in the general, I guess, catastrophe of the whole world ending, um, that calm and I guess reassuring voice would be revealed to be the Antichrist. Take that however you will, I suppose. There's a lot of theories about, oh, well, is it going to be a person? Will it be a corporation? Will it be something that we don't understand yet? It doesn't really matter. It's an idea that I think actually sort of transcends religion, because in a way, even if you don't believe that the Antichrist, quote unquote, is some sort of supernatural figure, you can definitely see a bunch of likely candidates, for
Oh yeah,
uh,
yeah.
um, for people that pretend to be your friend and people that reach out the hand of friendship, and are promising to make everything okay, but then will turn around and use their power to basically end the whole world. Even though that does fit right in line with what Revelation says, I think that it's very believable, even for an agnostic or atheist individual to, just to think that there is somebody or something out there, or will be somebody or something out there that pretends to be something that they're not, and then ends the whole world.
Oh no, I agree with you 100%, man. Yeah, it's kind of hard for people like when you're looking deep into this type of stuff and looking into the Bible and how it correlates with that. I mean, it's almost like banging your head against the wall. Like, how come other people can you not see this? Um, but one thing I was going to ask and touch back up on the media topic, would you say that the government ultimately has their hands into these media outlets to control when they want something in their favor? You know, Specifically, I've heard that like most of the media outlets are owned by like six main companies, and honestly, um, can you see the government actually having that correlation in there?
Oh yeah, I mean, 100%. It's it's almost impossible to conceive that there's any media agency at all that's not a complete tool of the established government, or if not the government directly. I guess instead of government, I'll just say I don't think that there's any media outlets that are not in control of the people that are in charge of this country, whether or not you want to say that that's the government, yeah, or somebody else. Um, yeah, I mean, Fox News is no better than CNN. It might be more entertaining to watch, but it's the same garbage. Um, Political pundits on TV, talking about how the other side has got it all wrong. There's a few individual voices of reason, I think, that are not terrible. Um, and while they definitely do carry a lot of water for their particular party, there's some people that actually do have something interesting to say and have some nice ideas, and that's why the independent media um, is kind of a welcome sight right now. And I'm not really talking about Alex Jones. Alex Jones is like, Cheetos, no, fun to eat, fun to look at, but really no nutritional value.
Yeah.
But other
Bombs being sent to like the Democratic um, people and whatnot. Do you think this is like another one of those ploys, kind of like Charles Tilley talked about, or you think it's just a crazy guy?
You could really cut it any way that you wanted to. When so you can look at it on as shallow a level or as deep a level as you wanted to. If you really wanted to go into conspiracy la la land, which I'm definitely a fan of sometimes, you could say that um, people are programmed to react extremely to certain stimuli by whoever is in control, and so this was either an orchestrated event by somebody nefarious, to again further divide us and justify violence against one side by the other, or you could just say that it was a crazy guy. And the reason that this crazy guy was set off was because of all of the extreme rhetoric and stuff like that that's happening right now. Either way, it's still the fault of the system, whether or not it's a real bona fide conspiracy that he was, somehow, activated or something like that to do what he did, is sort of irrelevant because I guess he was set up to do exactly what he did because he's obviously mentally ill, or in some form, shape, way, or another. And the reason that he was set off, I guess, is because there's so much polarization and so much really confusing and at times really really harmful rises in the temperature, I guess, of the conversation. So it was sort of it sort of had to happen at some point, just with the way, that people are ramping up, uh, I guess, criticism of the other side. And it's just another demonstration of how, this is an extreme example, but it's just another demonstration of how the two-party system just gives people the opportunity, I guess, to, sorry, hold on one sec.
I'm to be a Seattle fan. I'll see you on the flip side.
Right on.
Have a good day.
You too, man. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're good.
And so, yeah, it's just a really extreme example of how the two-party system is just, I guess, a tool that's used to, to give something to the people to get them riled up about, whether that's talking about, abortion or whether it's, giving the people, some kind of madman bomber that's sending pipe bombs, to prominent political figures. It's all just something to talk about around the dinner table, and I guess further confirm people's pre-existing biases against the other side. So, I forget what this gentleman's name is, and it's not super important to give him credit because he's a scumbag. But whoever he is, he's just a deranged individual. The reason why he did what he did is not really, really of any super great consequence. It's just more about the idea. It just shows that the people in control are most definitely succeeding in dividing the American people against themselves for almost no reason.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, no, I agree with you 100% there. It sounds like, it's something kind of like for everybody, just kind of talk around the dinner table, kind of like you're saying, kind of raise, some eyebrows and whatnot. My next question for you, and this will be kind of like one of the final questions, is where does the gun violence situation fall into this? Like the assault rifles and all these shootings, do you think this was like another thing that possibly maybe the government did? With the Steve Paddock and pretty much everything that somehow has to do with an assault rifle. Do you think this is to disarm the public? so that they can continue, not having to worry about the public coming at them with, weapons and start a revolution? Just kind of tell me your thoughts on that.
It's a really complicated thing. I don't necessarily, I'm not a believer in, I guess, the theory that public shootings are somehow orchestrated by the government, simply because there's really no even slim amount of evidence for most of them that's the case. But I think that it is really interesting. Couple of different things are really interesting. When you see like a mass shooting situation, I forget what the exact statistic is, but something close to almost 100% of gun violence in the United States is perpetrated with handguns. And for some reason, every time that somebody decides to go postal in public, they choose to use an AR-15. Not any other kind of semi-automatic sportsman rifle, because there's plenty out there that that would actually be far more suitable for a purpose like that. And they always choose this one scary-looking black plastic gun, and try to make an argument to take it away. And I think that if we assume that it's just random coincidence, and like copycats and stuff like that, and we don't pay attention to, maybe the government's involved in it, yada, yada. I think that the whole reason that the media likes to focus in on that kind of thing is to condition people, I guess, and sort of convince people that they should trust the government to handle firearms, and so to kind of slowly chip away and take a little bit more of the cake every single year. Oh, well, you can't have this magazine, you can't have this add-on, you're not allowed to own this gun in this area, things like that. I think that it's really just sort of their attempt to take away Americans' last bastion of personal freedom. They know that most of the public is asleep right now, and that they don't necessarily think that the government is a tyrannical power machine. But I think that they're afraid that one day everyone is going to wake up and realize what they're doing, and that when that day comes, you have a very well-armed American population, especially in in like Middle America, and out here in the West and the South. There's quite a few really, really avid sportsmen and just gun collectors, things like that. And I think that they're afraid that that's going to come back to bite them one day, and that the people are going to exercise their God-given right to basically give the government a day of reckoning at some point, and dismantle it and form a new one, because they realize that they're not doing what they promised that they'd do.
Okay, yeah, I absolutely agree with you that from somewhat southern states. Believe me, I know we have almost like a gun behind every blade of grass, So what would you say for people that want to look more into your topic? How would they learn about it? Go ahead and kind of wrap it up here.
Sure. If you are at all interested, you being the viewer, if you're at all interested in breaking the cycle of mental conditioning that's being pushed on you every single second of every single day, by everything from Lucky Charms ads, to the newest debate between two political candidates, cancel your cable subscription, stop watching any sort of mainstream media source, stop reading mainstream print media. And that doesn't mean just start going off in the weeds and looking at a bunch of fringe papers that claim that the government is injecting nanobots into children's cereal. But take a second and examine what you're consuming, and whenever you hear somebody talk and they're trying to sell you an idea, try to see through what they present as objective fact. Look at the agenda that they have, and just be smart about the media that you consume and how you consume it, your eyes will begin to open, and eventually, I hope most people will realize that partisan politics, the thing that creates a lot of contention at Thanksgiving and makes you hate your family and friends, is really just a very highly organized effort by the powers that be in order to make you a sheep and get you out to vote for crooks and keep them in power and keep them paid. So I guess stay woke, America.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, man. No, you're a really bright guy. It was a pleasure talking to you. I would honestly like to do another interview with some time down the road if you're willing to.
Sure.
It was really, really good to talk to you. And if you have any questions for me, let me know. I am going to edit this today and try to put it up. But man, it was a pleasure talking to you. I appreciate your time. Thank you for doing this interview. And you just have a good one, man.
Hey, thank you so much. Hopefully I don't get done like Seth Rich before we get to talk again.
Oh no, you're good, man. You're good. That's why I was
All
like,
right.
should I make this anonymous? But no, you're good. But
All
yeah,
right,
man,
Matt. Well,
great day.
well,
I appreciate it once again. Have a good one.
yes, sir. Peace be with you.